What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Motorfest. So in today's video, I do want to go over an interesting topic that has to do with the Loot Digger set. Now, I do know a lot of people are obviously going to grind out one of these and try to go after them, which I would say is going to be extremely useful because obviously it gives you double the parts from a set event, and doing something like a short race in one of these is going to be extremely helpful. But the big question is, though, is the Loot Digger set actually going to work correctly? So if a lot of people are wondering, the biggest thing with the Loot Digger is the fact that it gives you double the parts from a set event in one of the races that you actually complete. So you're obviously going to get more parts from those said races after doing them. And then, of course, if you were running something like a Nitrochemist set, you're obviously not going to get as many parts as you were with a Loot Digger. So I would say each part set is obviously going to have its place. But if you are grinding out many different part sets, guys, or even going after like spare parts, I would say the Loot Digger is by far going to be the best one. And that's the fact that you actually get double the loot from those set events. So a lot of players are most likely going to go after a Loot Digger before going after a different set. The RNG in this game is also going to play a big role when going after part sets because you could probably get like a full set done without a Loot Digger. I would even actually say most people probably have a Chemist or even a Scorebreaker without even having a full Loot Digger set actually active. I also had this happen to me multiple times when going after part sets. But I would say though, guys, a Loot Digger is intended to give you double the parts by 2, which I would say in a lot of ways the Loot Digger is actually working correctly and giving you the double amount of parts from that said race. So for example, if the event gives you, let's say, 5 to 7 parts without a Loot Digger, once you throw that on, you're probably going to get maybe 10 to 14. So I would say it is most likely going to work correctly in the amount of parts it is giving you. But my question is though, guys, even though you have a Loot Digger active, why is it whenever I do these events that I do tend to get a lot more green and blue parts from it? Funnily enough, I actually did many events when grinding out different Loot Digger sets with, like, let's say the racing, even the street tier 2, where I would actually get more blue and green parts than everything else. Which at first, when grinding out the Loot Digger set with many different classes, I was noticing that maybe you had to do a lot of different events first to at least have a better luck at gold parts afterwards with running a Loot Digger, but it does turn out, guys, I don't think that actually matters. So yes, when you obviously have a Loot Digger, you are going to get more parts. Unfortunately, though, the big thing I notice is you are going to get more of the parts you actually do not need. So you're most likely going to get a lot of green and blue parts, and you will also get a lot of purple/pink. I have been noticing many people saying that it's pink instead of purple, so I will basically be calling it pink/purple the entire time and basically mixing that up. Now I have to admit, guys, when running a Loot Digger, I'm not saying this set is going to be terrible, because I do have to admit one thing, it is going to work in the aspect that it does give you double the parts. I was noticing in many events after doing, let's say, 5 or 6 events in like a racing car, I had a lot more parts I could actually delete, which in return does give you more spare parts in the future. I may end up touching on more of that in another video, but I have to admit, guys, as I did mention before, the Loot Digger is indeed going to work in an aspect of giving you extra parts. The issue with this, though, is you are going to get a lot more parts you obviously do not need, which I would say a lot of players have been noticing. Like, for example, have you guys been doing a lot of events recently where you would basically get more green and blue parts compared to everything else, when you also have Goldfinger and Lucky activated as well? If we look back at the Crew 2, for example, when you mostly did a lot of events with a Loot Digger and Goldfinger/Lucky, so I would say this is most likely going to raise lots of questions if the Loot Digger set is actually working as intended. If we look back on the Crew 2, for example, guys, I noticed running a Loot Digger with Goldfinger and Lucky back on there, you would actually get primarily gold/purple and pink parts, and you would never see a green part drop at a higher difficulty. You would also rarely see any blue for that matter, so getting a maxed out set was much easier. Now I have to admit something though, I could honestly be wrong on this, but I do feel like the RNG in this game is most likely done like this on purpose right now, and it will most likely change when the game's life cycle obviously goes on. We are insanely close by to Season 2 in this game, so who knows, we might see a big update, which I would say everybody definitely wants, but like the issues still on last gen, with like the game freezing or like they still can't see their friends showing up in a crew. Hopefully all that stuff is going to be addressed in Season 2 in the next big update coming, but I have to admit, guys, grinding out sets back on the Crew 2 was definitely easier. Now, I do want to say though, even though the Loot Digger set is definitely not going to be working as 100% intended as it should, I would still recommend going after one of these sets, guys, because it is still insanely useful. I would say getting way too many green and blue parts is probably going to be extremely frustrating, but I do have to admit one thing: yes, the Loot Digger set might annoy a lot of people, and I would even say most of the events I actually did, I probably got at least 1 to 2 gold parts, and then of course most of the time I would probably get green and blues besides that. But I have to admit though, guys, I did have events where I would basically get only green and blues, and then of course throw a few purple slash pink parts in there, and then of course I would do another event right after that and get like 5 gold parts from it. So I guess it is really going to be like an RNG based thing, so who knows? This actually might be as intended with a Loot Digger right now. Maybe they weren't aiming to have this like it was in the Crew 2, because if it was, you would most likely be getting a lot of gold parts compared to everything else, so you would most likely max out many of the classes a lot quicker, and I would say the biggest intent here is to do a lot of races. That way you actually get more parts over time, even though you could be missing like one category, and for some odd reason Gearbox never wants to drop, even though you've done about 100 events in that said class with a Loot Digger, but maybe the Gearbox part doesn't actually like you. Which I would say almost everybody has experienced that exact same issue where they basically can't get one part, and they are most likely still hunting for that said part even weeks later. Now the thing is, if you are running a Loot Digger set and going after those said part sets to get them done, you would actually think over time with getting double the loot from that said event, that you would most likely get that said part like a gearbox that you are missing, but grinding out a Loot Digger set in Motorfest is definitely going to give you different results than before, and I would say a lot of players going after this set and going after Goldfinger slash Lucky on each one are probably going to be slightly disappointed when grinding with it, like getting a lot of green and blue parts from a set event after spending all that time getting that said set done. Now I would like to know your thoughts and your experiences with the Loot Digger set so far. I would probably say the Loot Digger set is obviously working as it should be, at least for the most part, and that's going to be the fact of giving you the double parts from that said event, but I would say a lot of players are not asking for double the green and blue parts from that said race, when they are most likely looking for more purple slash pink and gold. That is not only going to be helpful with getting maxed out part sets, but you can also get a lot more spare parts to actually reroll these said parts you actually have, so it is going to be like an entire thing that obviously is going to work. And I would say a lot of people getting green and blue parts, you obviously don't even need them. Now I guess in some way though, the Loot Digger is going to be working correctly in the aspect of getting double the amount of parts from these said events, but I have to admit having Goldfinger and Lucky on there and constantly getting green and blues is basically going to frustrate every single player.